Chapter 501 Step 2 You are listening at novelfull.audio. As waves of summer heat assaulted the city, its concrete and alloy jungle had turned into a sweltering oven. The air filtration systems were running without pause to save the people from suffocating in the clouds of pollutants, and in poorer districts, water had to be rationed because of the drought. O.org, luckily, none of that touched the peaceful terrace neighborhood. Here, people leisurely enjoyed the warm weather in the cool shade of the tall trees when they had free time, had unlimited access to fresh water and delightfully cold drinks, and lived their lives seemingly without a care in the world. Sonny was constantly surprised to find himself among these fortunate and prosperous people. For the past month, his life was very busy, but without any distress. He had been steadily working toward his various goals, slowly making progress toward each. His shadow fragments were nearing full saturation, and so were Saint's. He had returned to the dreamscape and participated in countless duels in the professional arenas, where the fighters were much more capable and gave him the opportunity to witness, and comprehend, many different battle styles. As the result, Sonny was able to further develop shadow dance, making his mastery of it much more solid. The Prince of the Underworld, enchantment of the mantle was now also very different from how it had been before. Even if he wasn't going to reach the mark, 6,000 defeated opponents, any time soon, or even a third of it, he was still making consistent progress. The counter already showed 1579/6000. The drawback, of course, was that with each day he went without losing a fight, Mongrel received more and more praise and attention. These days, each of his duels gathered an audience as large as that of the top Dreamscape broadcasters, especially because some sort of a yearly tournament seemed to be approaching. Mongrel's fans, however, were doomed to be bitterly disappointed. Sonny had no plans of participating in a foolish imaginary competition. He didn't care about fame and recognition, and was too busy to even spare it a thought. Apart from practicing shadow dance, he also continued training with Effie and Saint, slowly bringing his mastery of the spear close to that of his knowledge of the sword. He also had to run the Brilliant Emporium, which was quickly blossoming into an actual enterprise thanks to Aiko's management and hard work. And of course, he had been training Rain. Come on. Seriously. She was currently in his living room, staring at him with outrage. Sonny tilted his head a little. Sure. What seems to be the problem? Rain opened her mouth, then shook her head. Listen, Sonny, I understand that you are the teacher, I really do. But it has already been a month, and all you taught me were wilderness survival lessons. And only one. Strike, which I had repeated thousands of times already. When I asked you to train me, I thought. Sonny grinned. You thought what? That I will teach you how to decimate nightmare creatures and bring all your enemies to their knees. She coughed in embarrassment, then said in a small voice. Yes. He shrugged. But that is exactly what I am teaching you. Who do you think survives in the dream realm? The best swordsman. The strongest fighter. No. You need to be alive to fight a nightmare creature, and for that, you need to know how to find food, water, how to read tracks and move through the environment without letting it kill you. And it will try to kill you, believe me. He paused, then added. Yes, they taught you the basics in school, but not nearly enough. You want to live long enough to become strong. Then this is step 1. Rain let out a long sigh, and then looked at Effie for support. The huntress was currently balancing in her wheelchair with a bored expression on her face, waiting at the door for some snacks she had ordered to arrive. What? Listen to Sonny, kid. He might look like a wet weasel, but this guy knows his stuff. The things he lived through are simply beyond reason. Honestly, if he had any shame, he would be dead. Sonny spared her a dark glance, and said. Thanks. I guess. Rain frowned, accepting her defeat. A few moments later, she suddenly asked. What's step 2? He raised an eyebrow. What? You said that learning to navigate the environment without dying is step 1. What's step 2? Sunny looked at her for a few moments, then said. It's about your mindset. You're not ready for step 2 yet, though. We'll get to it when the time is right. For someone like Rain, that step was going to be the hardest. She didn't really have an aptitude for violence, yet, because her life so far had been nice and soft. But she would have to not only come to terms with violence, but also adopt it into the very core of her being, make it one of the cornerstones of herself. That was the only way to survive the spell. Ironically, for Sunny, that step had been the easiest. In fact, he had made it long before his first nightmare, long before the spell even knew of his existence. Rain stared at him with disappointment, then sighed. That I just want to be strong like her. He blinked a couple of times. Like who? Rain suddenly smiled. The awakened who saved me. She is so amazing. So strong, so beautiful. A true warrior, not someone like you. Suddenly, a mortified expression replaced her wistful smile. Oh. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it like that. You are great, too, Sunny. I'm sure. Just, not on her level. Sunny stared at her for a bit, then said in a strange tone. Sure. No offense taken. Not everyone is made to be a true warrior, that's right. He wanted to say something else, but at that moment, his communicator suddenly rang, announcing an incoming call. Sunny frowned. Who might it be? Very few people ever called him. Looking at the screen, he suddenly felt a bit cold. It was the Sour Reaper herself, Ascended Jet. What? Why is she calling me? Sunny hesitated for a couple of moments, then answered the call. Yes. Master Jet. The familiar voice, as relaxed as ever, came out of the speaker. Oh, hey there, awakened Sunless. Are you free right now? What does she want? He glanced at Rain, thought for a bit, then said cautiously. Sort of. Why? For a few moments, there was nothing but static and the sound of a PTV moving coming out of the communicator. Then, Master Jet asked. Mind lending me a hand? Chapter 502 Sudden Request. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A strange expression appeared on Sunny's face. Lend her a hand. Me. Why would a master need help from an awakened? Meanwhile, Master Jet added. You'll be generously rewarded, of course. Well. I can't guarantee the generous part, really, but there will definitely be a reward. His eyes gleamed. Really? What kind? She chuckled. A fair share of contribution points. Enough to exchange for a decent memory, at least. Plus, didn't you say that you owe me a favor? That did not sound bad at all. Saint was on the verge of reaching the coveted 200/200 status, and was currently just a few shadow fragments away from it. However, Sunny couldn't really agree to the proposal without knowing what exactly she expected him to do. Or could he? Master Jet was one of the two Ascended he knew, and his only contact to the government. This was a relationship worth maintaining, which meant that it wasn't wise to refuse her request for assistance. Plus, Sunny quite liked her, and also owed her a lot, even before she had saved him during the gate battle. They were both from the outskirts, and had a rather good rapport. They had a connection. He lingered for a moment, and then said. All right, no problem. I'll do it. Master Jet answered with satisfaction in her voice. Good. I'll come pick you up, then. Sunny glanced around, evaluating how presentable his living room was. He was suddenly a bit nervous. What the hell? What are you nervous for, fool? He cleared his throat, and then said. Sure, oh, wait. Let me give you an address. Master Jet laughed. Gee, Sunny. I work for the government, remember. I know your address. Before he could respond, the call was cut off. Sonny was left standing with a rather dumbfounded expression on his face. She knows, well, of course she knows. I wonder what else she knows. Noticing the strange look on his face, Rain asked. Did something bad happen? Sonny sighed, then slowly shook his head. No, nothing bad. Just some business I have to deal with. Sorry, we'll have to continue the lesson next time. She stared at him for a moment, then shrugged. Well, all right. I'll practice back home, then. With that, Rain picked up her training sword, said goodbye to Effie, and left. A couple of seconds after the door closed behind her, the former huntress gave him an amused look. That pupil of yours is a bit dense, isn't she? Sonny frowned, offended by her words. What do you mean? Effie giggled. Well, you've been tutoring her for a whole month, and she still has no idea who the two of us are. We're just two average, random awakened to her. I mean, it's not surprising that she didn't recognize you. But I am a very famous person, you know. Sonny smiled slightly. Yeah. Your pride must be really hurt, venerable raised by wolves. Please accept my sincere apologies. Not everyone, you see, is obsessed with the awakened. Rain, for example, is more interested in historical stuff, about or from before the spell. Plus, the government mostly uses your dream realm appearance to plaster all over the city, so. Effie waved a hand. I'm joking, you doofus. She's a good kid. She paused for a moment, and then added. That's why it hurts me to see her wasting money on a hack like you. At that moment, there was a sound of a PTV stopping nearby, and of light steps approaching their door. Effie's eyes shined. Turning her wheelchair, she opened the door and yelled. Finally. Master Jet stood on the porch in her usual deep blue uniform, with one hand raised to knock on the door. Her jacket, as always, was carelessly unbuttoned, revealing her slim waist and generous figure. Her short raven-black hair was a bit messy, and there was a look of slight surprise in her icy blue eyes. Effie stared at the older woman for a few moments, disappointment clearly written on her face. Then, she said dejectedly. BL.net. Oh. You're not food delivery. A polite smile appeared on Master Jet's face. Ah. Awakened Athena. It's an honor to meet the famous raised by wolves. I am Ascended Jet. Effie glanced at her, then at Sonny, then back at Master Jet. Then, she smiled. Good job, doofus. I approve. Sonny gave her a murderous look, cursed inwardly, and turned to Master Jet. Do I need to prepare? She shook her head. Your usual memories should do. If everything goes well, you won't even need to use them. He hesitated, and then asked. What if it doesn't go well? Master Jet grinned, making Sonny suddenly feel very uneasy for some reason. Well, then it'll go badly, won't it? We'll know when we know. With that, she looked at Effie and said. Please excuse us. Time is of the essence, so we will have to leave immediately. It was very nice to meet you, awakened Athena. Effie winked at her. Sure. It was nice to meet you, too. Bring snacks next time. Sonny felt his ears turning red and promised himself to have a word with her when he got back. Or better yet, kill her. Yes, that would be much better. What next time? There won't be a next time. He quickly put on shoes and followed Master Jet outside, then got into the familiar PTV. As soon as the doors closed, she sent the vehicle moving at full speed, the acceleration pressing Sonny into the seat. The streets of the Terrace district flew by in a blur. Master Jet glanced at him, then said wistfully. That's a nice home you have there. Feels strange, right? To own one. I did the same thing after becoming an awakened, actually. Granted, it took me a bit longer to earn enough. You could have afforded a much better district, though. You know that, right? Sunny shrugged. Yeah, I know. But I like it here. It's quiet. She looked into the window and smiled. Can't deny that. Sunny waited for a few moments, then finally asked. Master Jet. Sorry, but what exactly are we doing? She briefly glanced at the control screen of the PTV, sent it into a sharp turn, and answered calmly. We are going to hunt down a dangerous beast. He frowned. Beast? What kind of a beast? Master Jet remained silent for a few moments. Then, she glanced at him and smiled darkly. The most dangerous beast there is. A human. Chapter 503 Harsh Reality. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Sunny shifted in his seat, a bleak expression appearing on his face. A human. Why would a master be hunting down a human? There was police for that. Unless, of course, that human was an awakened. Sunny was aware that special government agents, carriers of the nightmare spell themselves, dealt with those awakened who broke the law, simply because police officers were often helpless against criminals that possessed inhuman strength and wielded bizarre or dangerous aspect abilities. It made sense that Master Jet would be involved in that side of government work, too. But, honestly, he didn't know too much about how these things usually went. Glancing at her, Sunny asked. Is it an awakened criminal? Master Jet spared him a short glance. A criminal. Yes, you might say that. She remained quiet for a few moments, and then corrected herself. No, actually, do not. The man we must find is not a criminal. He is an animal. A rabid one. Sunny frowned. An interesting choice of words. Master Jet was concentrating on driving the PTV, so she didn't answer immediately. When she did, however, her voice was strangely calm. You are not an inexperienced sleeper anymore, Sunny, so I will be straightforward. You, of all people, should be able to understand. The nightmares, the dream realm, they take a toll. Some people endure, some people break. Some people carry the nightmares back with them to the real world. A dark expression slowly appeared on her face. From what I heard about the Forgotten Shore, you witnessed the worst of what the spell does to us. Yes, we awakened are at the top of the world, those who return alive, that is. We have all the privileges, all the money, all the power. But the mark it leaves on us never goes away. After all the pain, blood, and horror, after all the crap we the lucky few are forced to survive, many crack. Master Jet looked at the road, her icy eyes full of unimaginable coldness. Some crack a little, and some crack a lot. The government portrays us awakened as powerful and noble, the saviors of the world, but really, most of us are walking on the edge, just one little step away from madness. All that trauma can mess one up really good, you know. It's all a big, big mess. So, when one of the awakened loses control up and makes that last step, what do you think happens? Sunny remained silent for a while, thinking about the damage a deranged awakened could do in the mundane world. His expression became dark and heavy. He didn't even want to imagine. When that happens, you receive a call. Master Jet glanced at him and smiled. Smart. Yes, when an awakened goes out of control, or someone like me, receives the call. Things like that usually don't get out, because the government doesn't want them to. For obvious reasons. Everything is dealt with quietly, and so, here we are. Sunny didn't speak for a bit. Then, he asked. So, what exactly is going to happen? We find this guy, talk him down or overpower him, and then put him in cuffs. Arrest him. What a funny thought that was. Him, making an arrest. Sunny had been on the other side of this equation a few times in the past, and never in his life had he imagined putting handcuffs on someone, and not the other way around. Master Jet gave him a complicated look. There was almost pity. No. We are not going to arrest him. Sunny blinked a couple of times. Will he be free to walk around as if nothing happened until the trial? Of course, there was another, much darker answer. As if reading his thoughts, Jet slowly shook her head. No. No, he won't be walking around. Sunny looked into the window. Master Jet sighed. If they summoned me, then things are already beyond that. Think about it, if a mundane human needs to be contained, you can put them in prison. But we are awakened. Realistically, there is no prison that can be built to hold us. Not with every aspect being unique, and demanding unique means of containment. So there will be no arrest, and there will be no trial. She accelerated the PTV even further, and then said evenly. There will only be an execution. Sunny looked out the window, not sure how he felt about that. Yes, what Master Jet said made sense. Awakened were too powerful, and too dangerous. If one of them lost control, then they needed to be dealt with, somehow. In a perfect world, they would go through the same process that mundane humans went through. They would be arrested, tried, and either locked in a cell or receive proper help in a mental institution. But this was not a perfect world. So, instead, they would just be hunted down and executed, and the whole thing would be swept under the rug to preserve the spotless reputation the awakened enjoyed. Although harsh, this was the somber reality. He wasn't against the idea itself. He just didn't know how to feel about the fact that this time, he was going to be the executioner. Finally turning to Master Jet, Sunny lingered for a few moments, and then asked. So why me, of all people? Why ask me for help? Master Jet glanced at him, then grinned. 3 reasons, really. She blew through an intersection, almost crashing into a heavy cargo vehicle, and then dodged it at the last second. First, I know you. There are many people who could have helped, but very few whom I would trust to have my back. Sunny nodded, strangely pleased to hear that. Second, from the initial information I received, the suspect might have an aspect that is somewhat similar to yours. High affinity to shadows. So, you'll be helpful when we're tracking him down, and if things go south, he won't be able to escape easily. Another shadow user. Interesting. She gave him a calm look, and added. And lastly, there are a lot of people working for the government, but very few who are suited for this kind of work. Unlike you and I. Sunny considered her words. After a while, he asked. Because I am from the outskirts, just like you. Master Jet remained silent for a bit, and then gave him a bright smile. No. Because you are a killer. Just like me. Chapter 50 For the right people. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sunny wanted to deny her words, but in the end, simply turned away to look at the city streets flying by. Master Jet knew, of course. She had long known that he had the capacity to be a killer because of the cruel past the two of them shared, and more than that, she had access to the records about the events of the Forgotten Shore that the government agents had compiled. Out there, Sunny had killed his fair share of people. He had not been the most active participant in the civil war for the throne of the Bright Castle, but his hands were covered in blood, too. There were very few survivors of the Dark City who, like Aiko, managed to go through that morbid ordeal without staining themselves with human blood. And then there were other lives that almost no one knew that he had ended: Castor, Harus, the hunters who had kept Kai locked in the dark well, and Harper. Even before that, he had killed the old slaver, Shifty, Scholar, and Oro of the Nine without batting an eye. Honestly, it was not a big deal. Except for maybe Harper, Sunny never lost sleep over any of the humans that had died by his hand. If he was honest with himself, he had to admit that some of them he even enjoyed killing, a little. And it was precisely the fact that he didn't think of it as a big deal that proved Master Jet's words. Sunny was a killer, and not in the sense that he had killed before or had been taught how to. He had an innate aptitude for that sort of thing, and there were not a lot of people who did. In fact, he only knew 3. The first one was himself. The second was Nephise. She was the one who had taught him about murder, after all. Maybe that was one of the reasons why Changing Star had chosen to impart her family battle style to Sunny. Maybe she had recognized that the two of them were similar, that both of them had seen and known the truth of this world. That he would be able to understand. The third one was Master Jet. Sunny suddenly realized that he didn't know much about her, apart from her rank, her past as a kid from the outskirts, and her role as a government operative. Everything that he thought he knew about Master Jet had come from what others told him about her, painting an intimidating and imposing picture of the fearsome Soul Reaper. That picture, however, did not reveal the real human hidden behind the loud nickname. In fact, it only served to obscure her more. What nightmares Jet herself had survived on her path to becoming a master? What were her hopes, her convictions? What were her goals? He had no idea. Being calm thinking about it, Sunny hesitated for a while, and then said. Master Jet. Can I ask you a question? She glanced at him briefly and smiled. Sure. Sunny carefully chose his words before formulating a question. In the end, he asked simply. Why are you not a saint? Master Jet laughed, her voice full of amusement. What a peculiar question. You say it as though becoming a saint is something that just anyone can do. He shook his head, not willing to let it go. But you are not just anyone. Sure, you might be younger than most masters out there, but very few of them can compare to you in terms of talent and power. The fact that you chose to challenge the second nightmare proves that you have ambition. So why stop? She spared him another glance and asked with an easy smile. Why? What have you heard? Sunny shifted uncomfortably. Crap. I've been told that no one wants to go into a nightmare with you because of your problematic personality. Murderous savage and psychopathic killer, these were the precise words they used. Sorry. Her smile turned wider. Really? Haven't heard those before. Huh. I like it. But what do you yourself think? He remained silent for a bit, and then said with a bit of doubt. I don't think I buy it. I just took it at face value as an inexperienced sleeper, but after the Forgotten Shore, that statement doesn't seem to make sense. Sure, it is important to trust those who you enter the nightmare with, but at the end of the day, strength is strength. And you are very strong. You also work for the government, which proves your ability to be an adequate part of a larger collective. To work in a team. So, I simply don't understand. Master Jet did not speak for a while, concentrating on the road. Eventually, she answered, a hint of darkness finding its way into her voice. That is because you don't know enough. You're young, and haven't had to deal with the awakened affairs a lot. Plus, some of these things people only learn after reaching a certain stage. You're not at that stage yet, but since you asked, I'll answer. She looked at him, the smile disappearing from her face. It is very simple, really. Basically, you need the right people to help you become a master. But to become a saint, you need for the right people to not obstruct you. Take it as you will. She didn't say anything else, and Sunny did now ask, a deep frown appearing on his face. For the right people, to not obstruct you. He understood what Master Jet was hinting at, of course. He knew enough to come to the right conclusion. What she just told him was that to become a saint, one had to receive permission. And it wasn't too hard to realize who had to give that permission. The sovereigns. Who else but them? The 3 supremes who ruled the most powerful awakened, the legacy clans, from the shadows. Come to think of it, such an arrangement made a lot of sense. There were just a few dozen saints in the world, and each of them possessed unbelievable, mind-boggling powers. Would the sovereigns have allowed for such powerful individuals to exist outside of their control? From everything that Sunny knew about the vile nature of power and how the world worked, the answer was obvious. No. So, did every saint out there actually belong to one of the sovereigns? It seemed that they did. Even Sky Tide of the White Feather Clan, who gave Sunny an impression of being a reclusive and fiercely independent woman, was beholden to a great clan, and, therefore, to Anvil of Valor, Vale of Aster, Song, and Vale, the sovereign of that clan. What about people like Master Jet, then? Someone capable enough to become a saint, but either labeled as undesirable or simply unwilling to submit to one of the supremes. What was the obstruction she had spoken about? Was it a simple lack of support, or would the sovereigns go much further to prevent an independent saint from appearing in the world? If they had no problem with sending assassins to kill the 6-year-old daughter of their former comrade and companion, then they would surely have none with making someone like Jet meet an unfortunate end, should she act out of line. He lowered his head and briefly covered his eyes with a hand. It's the same, it's absolutely the same crap as what Gunlog had done in the Bright Castle. Gods, how unoriginal. But that was the thing about vile things. People love to romanticize evil and those who committed it, creating countless alluring characters to act as compelling and brilliant villains. But in reality, human evil was almost always banal. It always followed the same disgusting, predictable paths, and led to the same hateful end. No wonder Nephites wanted to destroy them so much. Sunny's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by the PTV coming to an abrupt stop. Looking out the window, he saw that they had arrived at a dark and narrow alley, which was currently blocked off by a police cordon. Blinking lights of several armored police vehicles drowned it in an unsettling glow, and there were many officers on the scene, their faces pale and tense. Master Jet yawned, stretched, and gave him a crooked grin. Rise and shine, awaken sunless. We've arrived. Chapter 505 The Slaughterhouse. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sunny get out of the PTV, somewhat apprehensive of what he was about to see. The police officers present at the scene looked very relieved to see Master Jet and him appear, their tense faces cleared, and the darkness hiding in their eyes seemed to dissipate a little. This was not at all how these types of situations were usually portrayed in popular media. In the crime mystery shows, whenever a plucky mundane detective encountered a cold and book awakened agent, their relationship always started very confrontationally, with mutual disdain and debates over who was supposed to handle the case, only to end as an entertaining team up, of course. Once again, reality turned out to be very different from how storytellers liked to portray it. There was no conflict over jurisdiction or negativity expressed by the police officers. Instead, they were genuinely happy to see the awakened specialists arrive. Well, of course they were. It was just as the old policeman had once told, right before Sunny faced the first nightmare: if he died there and no awakened was near, they would have to fight the nightmare creature his body had turned into themselves. And that was not something mundane humans ever wished to do. Master Jet walked over to one of the policemen and greeted him with a short nod. Despite the fact that he was much older than her, not to mention Sunny himself, the officer treated them with the utmost respect. Nice to see you again, ma'am. Greetings, sir. Let me show you the way. He led them deeper into the alley, toward a heavy metal door that hid in the deep shadows. It was wide open, and there were strange flashes of intense white light coming out of it, mixing with the red glow of the police sirens. The whole situation seemed a little surreal to Sunny, as though he was in the midst of a strange dream. I mean, where else would I be addressed as "sir" by a police officer? Life sure is funny sometimes. Slightly amused by this thought, he turned to Master Jet and asked, "What is this place?" She hesitated for a few moments, then said in an unexpectedly dark tone, "It's a club, of sorts. Called the Slaughterhouse. One of the few such establishments in the city." Sunny stared at the door, which had no sign or any indication that there was a club on the other side of it. Was this a marketing ploy to create a feeling of mystique and exclusivity, or were there things going on inside that needed to be hidden? A peculiar name for a nightclub, Master Jet smiled with a corner of her mouth. It is meant for a very specific clientele. The ground floor is your usual dance club, but beneath it, there is a VIP area with an underground arena. There is nothing illegal going on there, just things that are in poor taste. She paused, and then added somberly. They send echoes, usually dormant beasts, to fight against mundane fighters there. The fighters are paid generously, of course, and the club profits from the rich assholes who enjoy watching this sort of thing enough to recoup losses if one of the echoes is accidentally destroyed. Everyone wins. I guess. Sunny frowned. He knew that wealthy people were big fans of wasteful forms of entertainment, and that there were arenas where precious echoes were made to fight each other just for the spectacle of it. Hiring mundane humans to battle them, though, wasn't it a bit too much? Did I suddenly become a child after the awakening? Of course, nothing was ever too much. Sunny knew all about how vice worked, from his childhood in the outskirts. His current surprise was just because he lacked knowledge of what forms it took among the more affluent layers of society. So what happened in that slaughterhouse? Master Jet shrugged. That's what we have to find out. All I know is that everyone inside is dead. Kind of ironic, actually. The police officer guiding them spared her a glance, and then said hoarsely. It's a proper mess there, ma'am. Not for people with weak stomachs. And also not something that a mundane human would have been able to do. Charming. Inside, the air was filled with the smell of blood. Sunny found himself in a vast hall flooded by flashing lights, blinding white mixing with short moments of absolute darkness to create a strange and invasive atmosphere. It was hard to perceive anything in this strobe light hell. Master Jet frowned. What's with the light show? The policeman looked down in embarrassment. Sorry, ma'am. We figured out how to turn off the music, but the lights are giving us some trouble. She gave him an unamused look. Well, get on with it. The officer turned around and walked away, shouting at his colleagues. A few moments later, the hall suddenly became enveloped in darkness, and then the regular illumination kicked in. Without the constantly flashing strobe lights, the club looked smaller and more worn down than Sunny had expected. He did not pay too much attention to the design of the interior, the raised stage, or the bar with hundreds of expensive-looking bottles standing on the shelves behind it. With a gloomy expression on his face, Sunny was looking at the bodies. There were more than a dozen of them, all broken and terribly disfigured, as if chewed and spewed out by a tornado. But of course, a natural disaster had nothing to do with what had happened in the seedy club. The result only looked like it. This was the work of an awakened. Suddenly, he remembered Master Jet's question, seeing it in a new light. When an awakened loses control, what do you think happens? The answer was right in front of him. Terribly battered human bodies were lying on the floor, drowning in pools of blood. Indeed, this was not a sight for those who had weak stomachs. But, for better or worse, Sunny had seen enough horrors to not be moved too much by such a scene. It left a deep impression even on him, though. Sunny didn't have to look too closely to realize what had transpired. The position of the bodies, the nature of their wounds, the murderer had not used some powerful memory or let an echo loose on these people. No, it was much simpler. They just did it with their hands. Back during the gate battle, Sunny had thrown a heavy vehicle at the advancing horde of nightmare creatures, carving a bloody path in their ranks. That was the strength of an awakened. Even if he had been augmented by a shadow, his own strength was still vastly superior to that of a mundane human. A frenzied awakened could tear through a dozen humans in a matter of seconds, and none of them would be able to do anything to stop it. In front of a spell carrier, mundane humans were like paper dolls. It only took a little effort to destroy them. That bastard. Sonny remembered how he had doubted whether or not he wanted to play the role of an executioner on the way to the crime scene. Rain could have been one of the victims. He could have been one, too, before becoming awakened. As he was looking at the broken bodies, all his doubts disappeared. Chapter 506 Silent Witnesses. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. As Sonny studied the bodies, Master Jet went away to talk to the police officers, and then returned with one of them. There was a disappointed expression on her face. No usable recordings left. Figures, places like this one only exist because they value the privacy of their clients. And the few cameras they did have shown nothing but darkness. Sonny looked at her, then sighed. Not much to tell from the victims, too. The murderer just used their fists. She shrugged. That's how it usually goes, in situations like this. The most likely scenario is that the murderer was one of the clients, who went on a rampage because of either alcohol or stimulants, and a momentary failure to hold on to their sanity. So I doubt that this mess was premeditated. Master Jet remained silent for a moment, and then added. He was lucid enough to use his aspect to obscure the cameras, though. So dealing with him won't be too simple. With that, she turned to the police officer and asked. Any survivors? Do we have witnesses? He hesitated for a bit, then gave her a strange look. Yes, actually, there are a few. But. The officer didn't finish the sentence, and just stared at them with an uneasy expression. Sonny raised an eyebrow. But what? Are they refusing to talk? The policeman shook his head slowly. No, they're not refusing. They just. I don't know, something is wrong with them. They just don't speak, or even react really. I've seen a lot of people in shock, and sometimes, they can seem almost catatonic. But this is something else. Gave us all the creeps, to be honest. Sonny and Master Jet glanced at each other, and then, one of them said. Lead the way. The officer sighed, then escorted them to the back of the club, where an inconspicuous door led to the service rooms. The witnesses were gathered in a small office, standing there motionlessly, with nervous paramedics trying to determine the reason for their condition. There were 5 of them, all sharing the same blank, strangely peaceful expression on their faces. They were completely silent, motionless, and still. They did not react to the arrival of new people at all. Their eyes were calm and empty. Sonny paled. How is this possible? It only took him a second to recognize what was wrong with the survivors, of course. In fact, they weren't survivors at all. These people were dead. To be more precise, they were hollow. How can a mundane human be hollow? Suddenly, he felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Looking at Master Jet, he saw that she had a deep frown on her face, too. The massacre in the dance hall was bad enough. But this just made the whole situation frightening and eerie. If before Sonny was just disgusted, now, he was starting to get concerned. What the hell? Master Jet stared at the 5 hollows for a few moments, then turned to the paramedics. Go take a break, guys. Let these people be. They are already dead. One of the paramedics, a mature woman with short blonde hair and gentle eyes, looked at her with confusion. I'm sorry, ma'am. But they're fine. We need to. Jet let out a heavy sigh. Their souls are destroyed. There is nothing you can do to help them. Something else will take care of the rest. The paramedic looked at her for a while, then glanced at the ground and silently walked away. Her colleagues followed, expressions of regret, anger, and horror clearly written on their faces. The police officer stayed, but made a point of standing as far away from the hollows as he could. Master Jet stood silently for a few moments, her scowls growing deeper, then turned to Sonny. Answering your question, I don't know. He hesitated for a bit, then asked. But how can a mundane human become a hollow? It's only supposed to happen to those who die in the dream realm, right? She glanced at him, then silently shook her head. Eventually, Master Jet said. Wrong. There is a very small chance of a powerful soul attack creating a hollow. But beings capable of dealing direct soul damage are very rare, so it doesn't happen too often. Almost never, really. Sunny walked closer to the 5 empty humans and studied them. Can you do something like this? Master Jet lingered for a bit, then answered simply. If I am really precise. Something was very wrong with these people. And not just the fact that they were hollow. There was something else, something that almost made Sunny's hair stand on end. A feeling of subtle, but profound wrongness. He reached out with shadow sense, and flinched. Master Jet did not miss that sudden reaction. What? Did you discover something? Sunny gritted his teeth, then nodded. They're shadows, they're dead. She stared at him with a raised eyebrow. How does this work? I don't know much about shadow affinity, sorry, it's a very rare type of aspect. Does damage to a shadow correlate to soul damage? Sunny thought for a bit, then shrugged. I am not so sure myself. There's no manual for it, after all. But, only 2 things ever managed to damage my shadow. One was another shadow, and the other was a soul attack. Sunny wasn't sure that he was comfortable providing Master Jet, a person specializing in exactly such a type of attack, with this information, but decided to share it nevertheless. He trusted her that much, at least. So, since shadows are susceptible to soul damage, it is not too much of a leap to assume that they share a deep connection to the soul, or are tied to it somehow, at least. She nodded, and remained silent for a while, thinking. Then, Master Jet echoed his recent question. Can you do something like this? Sunny shook his head. No. My aspect doesn't have means of dealing damage to someone's shadow. At least not yet. His shadow sense, meanwhile, spread throughout the whole club, allowing him to perceive it as a whole. And there, deeper underground, he noticed something strange. Sunny lingered for a few moments, and then turned to the police officer. Gather your colleagues and leave. Don't come inside again until either Master Jet or I tell you to. The policeman opened his mouth, wishing to say something, then simply nodded and hurriedly walked away. Master Jet glanced at Sunny with a question in her eyes. What was that all about? Sunny gave her a dark look. That's. How do I say this? I think the killer is still inside. Chapter 507 LN The Spotlight. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Master Jet remained silent for a second, then asked calmly. Are you sure? This place has been swept multiple times before we arrived. Sunny nodded. He is here. Underground. She looked down, her face slowly turning somber. Well, I guess we should go and say hi. Sunny nodded and made a step toward the door of the small office. However, she suddenly stopped him. Wait. He looked at her with a bit of confusion. Yes. Master Jet hesitated for a few moments. There was a complicated expression on her face. Finally, she said. There are very few people with a shadow affinity aspect in the world, and even fewer who frequent places such as this. Sunny frowned. What are you trying to say? She looked at him darkly. I'm saying that I might know this guy. In fact, when I heard that there was an incident in the slaughterhouse, I already had a suspicion of who was responsible. He blinked a couple of times. You know the murderer. Master Jet shrugged. There are hundreds of thousands of awakened in the world. That seems like a big number, but in fact, it is not. If you live long enough, sooner or later, you will know of everyone who is worth knowing, more or less. It's a small world. She paused for a moment, and then added. Point is, if I am right, then this will be dangerous. This guy is not someone who has spent his whole life behind a citadel wall. Was the real deal. A specialist. Sonny glanced at the 5 hollows, then frowned slightly. A specialist, what a peculiar word. But he understood what Master Jet had meant. Most of the awakened were thrust into the spell and tried desperately to survive, striving to return to a semblance of a normal life. A much smaller amount, for whatever reason, embraced their new nightmarish reality and adapted to it, even thrived in it. They shaped their lives to suit the deadly challenge of the nightmare spell, and not the other way around. Sonny was one of these specialists himself, after all. If he is such a specialist, then how did this mess happen? Master Jet shook her head. Who do you think are the most compromised awakened? Folks who spent as little time as possible in the dream realm and then returned to their actual lives. No, it's people like us, the professionals. He thought on it for a bit, then said with confusion. I don't get it, even if he is a seasoned fighter, so what? You are an ascended. Surely, dealing with him will be easy. Master Jet shook her head. Nothing is ever easy, Sonny. That is a mindset that will get you killed. No matter how powerful you are, one mistake is all it takes. Raw power doesn't always decide the outcome of the fight. You should know this already, every aspect has a flaw, and every power has a counter. So keep your guard up. Sonny had to agree that she was right. His own experience served as the perfect proof. Haru's had died by his hand because Sonny's aspect was a perfect counter to his formidable ability, and Castor had been undone by his flaw. He remained silent for a few moments, and then said. When we confront this guy, pay attention to your shadow. Don't let him get anywhere near it. Master Jet frowned, and then gave him a simple nod. Together, they returned to the dance hall, and then found another heavy metal door. Behind it, a narrow staircase led further down, to the underground arena. The arena itself was larger than Sonny had imagined, and looked more like a luxurious theater than a fighting pit. The rows of seats were furnished with red velvet, and there were private boxes for the most affluent of the visitors. The arena itself resembled a stage and was surrounded by a protective barrier fashioned out of transparent alloy. The whole space was sparsely illuminated, with deep shadows nesting between the areas of light. Still, one could more or less see everything. Master Jet studied the interior of the arena, then said quietly. There's no one here. Sonny lingered for a moment, then walked over to a control panel hidden in one of the boxes and moved several switches. A moment later, bright spotlights ignited on the ceiling, flooding the arena with a bright radiance. The wave of light chased away the shadows, and suddenly, a figure of a man could be seen in the very center of the stage, sitting on the floor with his face buried in his hands. Previously, that place had seemed to be utterly empty. The man grimaced, and then raised his head to stare at the lights with a dark expression. A hoarse voice resounded in the silence of the underground theater. Bastards, why can't they just leave me alone? The murderer was around 30, with a gaunt unshaven face and bloodshot eyes. There were several used stimulant packs lying on the floor around him, as well as shards of a broken liquor bottle. His clothes, hands, and face were covered with blood, but the man didn't seem to mind. Blocking the light with one hand, he lowered his gaze and slowly focused it on Master Jet and Sonny. A hint of recognition slowly appeared in his eyes, which was then replaced with contempt. Is that you, Soul Reaper? Hell, they sent the attack dog herself after me. Ha! What an honor! Sonny sighed inwardly. What was it with people and calling others dogs? He really didn't get it. Dogs were marvelous creatures, from what he knew. Of course, only the rich could afford to have one. Dogs were the rich man's best friend. Jet took a step forward, piercing the man with a cold, cold gaze. The murderer shivered. Hi there, Kurt. Long time no see. After hearing her voice, the man called Kurt suddenly grinned. Yeah. Long time indeed. You got really full of yourself lately, haven't you, Jet? Funny that a government lapdog like you finds it beneath herself to associate with upstanding people like me. Back in the day, you at least knew how to show respect, bitch. Ignoring his insult, she smiled, too. Do you even understand what you have done, Kurt? The grin disappeared from his face. As Sunny and Jet slowly walked toward the arena, he furtively looked away. What, that mess upstairs? Ah, shit, who cares? They were just cattle, anyway. Mundanes only exist to produce more of us, right? So what's the big deal? Sunny's eye twitched. He's a proper bastard, isn't he? Master Jet, meanwhile, stopped smiling. That I care, Kurt. I care. He suddenly laughed. Wait, you're being serious. You're really going to do the whole thing? I'm getting the full parade. Fuck, that's hilarious. Suddenly, an ugly expression appeared on his face. Have you forgotten who you are, Jet? Gods, did becoming a master give you that big of a head? Come on, we all know who you work for, and who I work for. You'll still be a master when I am a saint, wench. He glanced at Sunny, and then added in a mocking tone. Look, you even had to bring a kid to help you out. I guess no adult is willing to get your stench on them. Then, Kurt got a bit serious and stared at Jet darkly, deep shadows slowly gathering around him. Look. I get it. I fucked up. So let's have it. Give me a slap on the hand, be on your merry way, alright. I'm having a really hard day as it is. We all know that you won't dare to do more, anyway. Master Jet tilted her head a little, and then said with amusement. Ah, but that's where you're wrong, Kurt. I do dare. Yeah, we both know who I work for, and who your sorry ass works for. But, the thing is, I don't give a damn. She chuckled and outstretched one hand, as if ready to summon her weapon. Kurt laughed again. This time, however, his laugh was a bit desperate. Then, he looked down and whispered. Ah, well. Not like it matters, anyway. You know about the Obel scale, so why even bother? Nothing will change. He remained still for a moment, and then suddenly exploded with movement. After that, everything happened very fast. Chapter 508 Battle of the Shadows. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Kurt moved with terrible speed, covering the distance between the center of the arena and the first row of the seats, where Sunny and Master Jet were, in a split second. Just from the way he moved, it was easy to tell that his soul core had been fully saturated a long time ago. He was indeed a powerful awakened. Still, it wasn't enough time to summon a memory. The white sparks that were supposed to form into a glaive were just starting to manifest themselves around Jet's hand, but he was already upon her. One of Kurt's hands shot forward, a knife forged out of a strange lusterless alloy appearing in it as if out of nowhere. There was no magic involved in its sudden appearance, though. The knife had just been hidden in a secret sheath on his forearm. Of course, Master Jet was much faster. She blocked the strike before it could ever reach her flesh. At the last moment, however, Kurt twisted his wrist and let go of the handle, sending the knife flying past her. Right at Sunny. He had barely any time to react. The cruel sight was still in the process of being summoned, so Sunny used his other hand to try and swat the knife away. It jerked up, but then froze. No, wrong. A fraction of a second too late, Sunny realized that the knife was not aimed at his body. It was aimed at his shadow. And since he had wasted precious time being mistaken about the killer's intentions, it was too late to move his body away to make the shadow shift out of harm's way. Luckily, Sunny's shadow could move on its own. It suddenly went out of the sync with his movements and jumped away, letting the knife bury itself in the floor and send a net of cracks through the sturdy synthwood boards. Shaken, Sunny belatedly jumped back. What is this? Any other awakened would have been killed by that devious attack, most likely. To Kurt's misfortune, though, he had met a fighter well versed in all things shadow. A few steps away, Master Jet was already turning her block into an attack. Her fist seemed to teleport forward, tearing through the air so fast that it sent a small shockwave rolling through the underground arena. Kurt had long disengaged, though. As soon as he threw the knife, he saturated his body with essence and lunged back, smashing through the velvet seats and momentarily appearing a dozen meters away. As soon as his feet touched the ground, he was already moving again, dashing sideways. At the same time, more knives flew at terrible speed toward Master Jet and Sunny. Their purpose was not to kill or wound them, but just to slow them down. One was meant for the Ascended, one for Sunny, and the last one for his shadow. Sunny dodged the knife and summoned the shadow to wrap itself around his body, feeling his strength and speed become even more enhanced. He dashed forward, and finally felt the cool wooden surface of the cruel sight's hilt appear in his hand. Not too bad. Jet's voice tore this thought to shreds. Be careful. He's planning some tea. Before she could finish the thought, a dark smile appeared on Kurt's face. In the next moment, something massive broke through the floorboards and struck her, or at least tried to. Soul Reaper easily sidestepped the attack and jumped back, then suddenly twisted, making her shadow grow smaller. A fourth knife appeared out of nowhere and pierced the floor where it had been just a moment ago. Kurt clicked his tongue. That's so annoying. Sunny, meanwhile, was staring at the thing that crawled from under the floor. It looked like a mound of worn rags, with two long arms that had one too many joints growing out of it, each ending in three terrifying curved claws. The towering thing was vaguely humanoid in shape, with broad shoulders and a small head covered by a tattered hood. He felt angry at his own stupidity. An echo, curses, of course he has an echo. Why else would the bastard frequent the slaughterhouse and its underground arena? Something didn't add up, though. Whatever that thing was, it didn't look like any kind of a dormant beast Sunny had ever seen. If he had to guess, he would be willing to bet that the creature was at least of the fallen rank, and had at least 3 soul cores hiding in its raggedy carcass. Maybe more. Weren't the arena meant for dormant echoes? As a vicious-looking curved sword appeared in Kurt's hands, Sunny got his answer. 3 more nightmare creatures suddenly appeared out of the shadows. These seemed not to be fallen, at least. He wasn't sure if they were beasts or monsters, though, just that they looked rather menacing. One was covered in black chitin and had a long tail that ended in a jagged blade, drops of poison falling from it and leaving smoldering holes on the floor. The other was like a repulsive mix of a human and a pale centipede, its limbs numerous and thin as bone needles. The last one resembled a marionette with sharp knives sewn to its wrists. The 4 echoes surrounded Master Jet. If it was anybody else, Sunny might have been worried. Soul Reaper, though, seemed unperturbed. She simply raised her glaive and smiled darkly. The air in the underground arena suddenly felt bitterly cold. She was probably capable of handling the echoes without too much trouble, even if one of them was a fallen demon or worse. Would she be able to do so while also paying attention to her shadow, though? That was not something people intuitively knew how to do. As the nightmare creatures attacked, Kurt surrounded himself with dancing shadows and dashed forward, while Sunny simply took a step back, and suddenly appeared in his way. The more shadows the bastard used, the easier it was for Sunny to get to him, after all. He noticed a hint of surprise in the killer's eyes, and brought the cruel sight down. The somber memory was in the form of a short sword right now, so the almost non-existent distance between the two of them was not an issue. Somehow, Kurt managed to dodge the silver blade and swiped at Sunny with his curved sword. Although he was incredibly fast, Sunny was much, much faster. He moved the cruel sight and blocked the strike without too much effort. Easy. Simultaneously, Master Jet's words echoed in his mind. One mistake is all it takes. Yeah. Sunny knew it all too well. Usually, he was the beneficiary of this deadly truth, and exploited the mistakes of his enemies to bring them down. This time, however, the situation was reversed. As something broke with a deafening crash and a roar full of agony resounded behind their backs, a triumphant spark appeared in Kurt's eyes. At the same time, his shadow suddenly moved. Even though the curved sword was already blocked, its black reflection held in the shadow's hand continued to swiftly approach Sonny's flesh. Before it could cut him down, though, the blade of the cruel sight suddenly ignited with blinding radiance, summoning pure sunlight into the underground arena. Sonny had activated the Light Eater enchantment, which could absorb and expel light. Because it shined much brighter than the lamps illuminating the theater, Kurt's shadow was suddenly thrown away, appearing behind him and far away from Sonny. An expression of shock twisted the killer's gaunt face, and he swiftly jumped back, creating distance between himself and the radiant short sword, which was already flying toward his heart. The hilt of the cruel sight, however, suddenly elongated, turning into the shaft of a spear. Before Kurt could do anything, the silver blade pierced his armor and buried itself deep in his chest. He opened his mouth, eyes full of disbelief. Before any words could escape it, though, the spear had turned furiously incandescent, and suddenly, the killer's body became enveloped with white flames. In mere seconds, he had turned into ash. Sonny sighed. "You have slain an awakened human, Kurt. Your shadow grows stronger. What a pity. I hope to receive more than a single fragment from a fellow shadow user." The spell wasn't done talking, though. You have received an echo. Chapter 509 Ghastly Reward. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. In the deadly silence that settled over the underground arena after the spell had spoken its last sentence, Sonny stared motionlessly at the flakes of ash swirling in the air. An echo. He was now in possession of a new echo. A human echo. Of course, it was only logical that an awakened could leave one behind. Sonny had received his first ever memory after killing a human, after all, and those were not too different. However, somehow, he had never considered commanding an echo left behind by a dead man. One that he had killed with his own 2 hands, no less. Wasn't it a little bit too ghastly? He imagined the soulless, empty copy of Kurt staring at him with lifeless eyes, and shivered a little. The situation was only made more morbid by the fact that a softly glowing soul shard was left in the pile of ash that the killer had turned into. Just like with nightmare creatures, the strange nature of Sonny's aspect left the crystal intact despite absorbing the shadow fragment. If an ordinary awakened was in his place, the shard would have formed empty and cracked. Sonny had never dug into the corpses of his human victims to retrieve one, so this was his first time seeing a soul shard left behind by one of his own kind. Before Master Jet could see it, too, Sonny bent down, picked up the luminescent crystal, and hid it in his sleeve. His face twitched slightly. Just as he did, an amused voice resounded from behind him. "Well, I'll be damned, that was fast." He hesitated for a moment, and then turned around. Master Jet was surrounded by a scene of devastation, the interior of the underground theater in her vicinity completely destroyed. She was casually leaning on her glaive, and there was an amused expression on her face. Kurt's echoes, of course, had disappeared after his death, however, Sonny didn't know how many of them she had killed before that happened. In any case, there were no wounds on her body. Master Jet whistled. "You actually put down the bastard all by yourself. That's, nicely done, Sonny." From her voice, it was clear that she was pleasantly surprised. And why wouldn't she be? Kurt had been an awakened with at least 10 years of experience under his belt, with a fully saturated soul core and an insidious, deadly aspect. While Sonny had become an awakened less than a year ago. He was never formally trained, and had no clan or organization supporting his growth. Not bad for a kid from the outskirts. He shrugged. He was overly reliant on the unique nature of his powers. A little knowledge of the shadows was all it took, really. She slowly shook her head. Maybe you're right. Still, Kurt had quite a reputation back in the day. But hey, why am I surprised? They gave you the SS designation for a reason. With that, Master Jet sighed and looked at the pile of ash with a complicated expression. After a few moments of silence, she added. You know, he was a promising young awakened too, once. One of the few who didn't treat me like a walking corpse back in the academy. Sunny glanced at the ashes, trying to imagine Kurt as young and promising. It wasn't too hard, however, thinking about a person he had killed this way made him uncomfortable. It was better to remember him as he had been at the end, a depraved, demented murderer. More of a rabid beast, really, than an actual human. Sunny scratched the back of his head. So then what happened to him? Master Jet lingered for a bit, and then shrugged. Life, I guess. Not everyone is cut out for the kind of life we live. In fact, very few are. Sunny dismissed the cruel sight, thought for a few moments, and then asked the question he really wanted to ask. So, that stuff he told about having a powerful protector. What was that all about? Are you going to be in trouble? Wait, am I? Jet smiled. What, did you believe that fool? Don't worry, he was just being delusional. Sure, he had rather powerful masters. But these people, they're not going to make a fuss about someone like him. Kurt became of no use to them the moment he lost control. What's more, he turned into a liability. So, if anything, we did them a favor by taking care of the mess ourselves. Her smile suddenly grew wider, but also darker. And if they decide otherwise? I'm not so easy to deal with, Sunny. And they would have to go through me first to get to you. He frowned a little, then nodded, accepting her reasoning. It all made sense, after all. Powerful people were also practical sort. They wouldn't hesitate to discard a broken tool, and that was what people like Kurt were, tools to be used and discarded once they couldn't be used anymore. Good thing I didn't join a legacy clan. I guess that is what I would have become if I did. Master Jet warned me against it for a reason. Then, something else came to his mind. The strange words Kurt had said right before launching his suicidal attack. Not like it matters, anyway. You know about the Obel scale, so why even bother? Nothing will change. What did he mean? It almost seemed as though the knowledge of this mysterious Obel scale was the real reason for why he allowed himself to lose control. Of why he had lost hope. Sunny lingered for a few moments, then asked cautiously. Oh, by the way. What was that nonsense Kurt went on about? The Obel scale. What is that? Master Jet gave him a long, somewhat strange look. Then, she simply shook her head. Don't worry about it. It's not some secret, anyway. You can find the information on the network. Obel was the name of a scientist who developed the Spelltech system the government uses to detect signs of a manifesting gate. The infrastructure of that thing is getting old, though, so the readings have become less reliable lately. Nothing that some thorough calibrations can't fix. Sunny tilted his head a little. Why was he so fixated on it, though? She looked at him with amusement. How would I know what went on in that crazy head of his? The bastard massacred 20 people, and thought that I would let him go after a stern reprimand. He was obviously not all there at the end. He frowned, and decided to let it go. Either Jet knew, or she didn't. Either way, it didn't seem like she was going to tell him. Instead, Sunny asked. So, what now? Master Jet dismissed her glaive and massaged her shoulders. Now. Nothing much, give me 20 minutes to settle things down with the police, and then we'll go get you your reward. She looked at him and added with a smile. By the way, thanks. This would have been much messier without your help. With that, Master Jet walked toward the exit from the arena, leaving Sunny alone. He stood silently for a while, and then sighed heavily. It was time to see about his new Echo, and decide whether he was going to keep the ghastly thing or not. Chapter 510 Human Echo. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Sunny looked around the destroyed theater, then found an intact seat and sat down. Relaxing on the soft velvet cushions, he crossed his legs and looked at the broken stage with a complicated expression. The shards of glass and empty stimulant packs attracted his attention for a moment. Sunny had expected the stimulants to be of the pleasure-inducing variety, but to his surprise, they were more or less the same as the ones he had used to stay awake for an entire week after returning from the Forgotten Shore. A slight frown appeared on his. Don't tell me, was this guy afraid of going to the dream realm? Kurt might have been even more broken than he had suspected. From how Master Jet had described her former acquaintance, the man had once been a dedicated combatant, a specialist. But what kind of a specialist was scared of his specialty? With a sign, Sunny stared into the distance and summoned the runes. And there it was, written in the ancient symbols in the air in front of him. Echo. Shadow Blade Kurt. Echo type. Beast. All humans were considered to be beasts by the spell, since they only had one soul core, so this was not surprising. Well, all humans except for Sunny and Nephice. As the thought of becoming a demon drifted into his mind, Sunny read further. Echo rank. Awakened. Echo attributes. Swift hand, shadow sworn, mark of death. Swift hand, attribute description. Your blade strikes fast and true. Shadow sworn, attribute description. You are known to shadows. Mark of death, attribute description. You bear a mark of death, as just like death, you were created to be a weapon. Sunny tilted his head a little. So, an attribute that increased perception and agility, an attribute that gifted Kurt affinity to shadows, although to a much lesser extent than his own, and a third attribute that, actually, Sunny had no idea what the third attribute did. Its description, though, was very interesting. He knew that death had been created by Shadow God, and now, he learned that it had been created as a weapon, but against whom? What kind of enemy could have demanded the creation of such a terrible thing? Someone immortal, perhaps. No, that didn't make sense. If there had been a time before death was invented, then everything back then was immortal, eternal, and endless, right? Sunny wasn't sure that he understood the concept of a world without death. What he did know, though, was that something as harrowing as death would not have been invented without a reason. He frowned, then turned his attention back to the runes. Echo abilities. Shadow manipulation, Shadow Strike, awakened. Shadow manipulation, ability description. You can affect the movement of shadows and walk through them unseen. Shadow Strike, ability description. You can strike at the shadows, and your shadow can strike at the living things. As expected. Sunny had more or less surmised what Kurt's aspect abilities had been. They were different, but at the same time similar to his own. Both were much less versatile and powerful than what he was capable of himself, though, even if the ability to deal direct damage to and through his shadows was something Sunny would have loved to have access to. Shadow manipulation, especially, was almost no more than a slightly different version of his passive attribute, Child of Shadows. Still, having a shadow like Kurt could add a new layer to his battle prowess. There was also the last ability. Awakened, ability description. This Echo has the innate abilities of a carrier of the spell. So, using memories. That was a nice ability to have. Even Saint herself was limited to only using weapons and charms. Full of thought, Sunny looked at the last string of runes. Echo description. I have entrusted you with a beautiful blade, but all you created was a hideous nightmare. He blinked a couple of times. What's up with that description? Oh my, am I imagining things, or does the spell sound bitter? What a funny thought that was. Sunny reclined in the chair and waited for a bit, then grimaced and dove into the soul sea. Let's take a look. He walked past the rows of silent shadows, noticing the dark figure of Shadow Blade Kurt standing among them motionlessly. Sparing him a glance, Sunny approached the spot between the black suns of his shadow cores, found a large sphere of light that orbited one of them, and summoned the echo down. The sphere floated to the surface of still waters and slowly dimmed, revealing a gaunt, naked man standing inside. Sunny felt his skin crawling. In front of him was a human, or rather, a soulless copy of a human. Echo Kurt looked almost like a person, but the lifeless emptiness in his eyes screamed of a profound, abhorrent wrongness. It was incredibly unnerving. The echo was very much like the hollow victims of its original, only even more vacant and devoid of the undefinable spark that all living things possessed. It was an artificial copy of a man that lacked the very thing that made him human. A ghastly effigy. The thing was incredibly creepy. Sunny hesitated, then tried to think about things logically. The echo was more or less useless to him in its current state, but thanks to its awakened ability, it would possess the innate capacity to use memories, which meant that Sunny could provide Echo Kurt with an armor and a weapon. That question was, did he want to? On the surface, that question was rather simple. Who wouldn't want to have a creature equal to a powerful awakened in their service? But really, things were more complicated. Sunny frowned, then raised a hand and poked the ghastly creature in the shoulder. A new string of runes appeared near it. Transform Echo into a shadow. He froze, thinking. Having a human shadow certainly had its benefits. But having any shadow also demanded a tremendous investment of resources. Nurturing Saint was very hard on Sunny, and especially on his pocket. Less importantly, but still somewhat pressing, was the need to spend 100 shadow fragments to complete the transformation. Sunny had spent so much time and effort to get close to creating a third core, and the idea of being suddenly pushed back by a whole 100 fragments did not seem too alluring. The point was, he felt reluctant to turn just any echo into a shadow. So was Kurt a worthy echo? Even though Sunny was very curious to see what would happen if one of the silent shadows was placed into a human echo, the answer was, no. Sunny wasn't sure that he was. There were two reasons. The first one was rather simple, but also not too convincing. Master Jet had said that all of them, seasoned awakened, were walking one step away from the madness. Sunny felt like dragging around a reanimated copy of a man he killed would bring him closer to making that step. His humanity, and sanity, to be honest, were already on thin ice. However, that wasn't the main reason. The second reason, and the most important one, was the nature of the shadows. Shadows weren't soulless, empty copies of their originals. They possessed a semblance of a consciousness, and a distinct personality. Saint was living proof. Yes, she was created from a powerful nightmare creature, but her attributes and abilities were not what made her strong. Saint was strong because she was Saint. Her will, intellect, and unbreakable resolve were what made her such a deadly presence on the battlefield, and a valued companion for Sunny. And that was why he didn't want to create a shadow of Kurt. Yes, Kurt possessed powerful abilities that shared the affinity with Sunny's aspect. But Kurt himself was weak. His weakness was the cause of why he had drowned himself in alcohol and distasteful hobbies, and why he had eventually surrendered to the burden of the nightmare spell and massacred defenseless humans in a fit of demented frenzy. No matter how powerful, Sunny didn't want to possess a shadow of an unstable butcher, but more than anything, he didn't want to possess a shadow of someone who was weak. How could he rely on someone like that? On the path he was taking, there was no place for weakness, at least not for the weakness of that kind. With a sigh, he summoned Saint, and watched her appear near the naked figure of Kurt in a whirlpool of black flames. The taciturn demon stared at him with her indifferent ruby eyes, not paying any attention to the human echo. Seeing them side by side only made Sunny more sure of his decision. He remained silent for a few moments, and then gestured at Kurt. Do you, maybe, want to eat him? Saint remained motionless for a few moments, then silently turned to the echo and raised one hand. Her gauntlet easily pierced the chest of the dead killer, and a few moments later, his body disintegrated into a flood of white sparks. Those sparks formed into 3 brilliant streams and entered into the darkness that hid inside the shadow, then flowed into her 3 core remnants. Your echo has been destroyed. Sunny felt a wave of bitterness wash over his heart, but very soon, it disappeared. He was watching the shadow fragment counter in the runes describing Saint. Apparently, feeding on echoes was much more nourishing for a shadow. She received much more fragments than she would have from an awakened memory of the first tier. Right now, the counter was showing a simple number. Shadow fragments. 200/200. A triumphant smile appeared on Sunny's lips.